Shabbat Shalom, everyone. After months of learning about the history of humanity, after learning about the history of the Jewish people through our patriarchs and matriarchs, through the exodus of Egypt and the receiving of the Torah, and even the beginning of the wandering in the desert, we now get to a new book of the Torah, right in the middle of the Torah, actually. It's the middle of the 5 books. And the tone shifts. The tone changes to something that is actually really difficult for us as modern Jews to access and to understand. Because we like stories. We like to hear that narrative. But when we start to talk about the details of the sacrifices, first of all, it reads a little bit like an instruction manual, right? How many people don't even bother to look at the instruction manuals? Oh, sure, I know how to do this, not a problem, right? But also, it's an instruction manual, frankly, not for all of us. It's an instruction manual for the Kohanim, for the priests, in terms of how they are supposed to do these sacrifices. And so we come to what I would consider to be one of the most crucial inflection points on how we as modern Jews understand Judaism. And the question that comes from this is, how do we deal with ritual? Right? How do we deal with ritual that is a little bit archaic, that comes from a different time, that maybe we say even some of the values behind it, even some of the ideas behind it, we in the modern world struggle with? So there are a number of different ways that we can think about this. But I want us to think about this morning. How do we deal with ritual? Because on the one hand, if everything is totally ritualistic, then we lose that connection to me today, right? Maybe I think about the world differently than my ancestors did. On the other hand, without that ritual, we've lost a sense of who we are as Jews. So what do we do? How do you think about ritual? And let's be honest, right? To say that ritual is a bad thing, most modern psychologists, psychiatrists would argue that creating habits, creating rituals in one's life anchors us, centers us. So how do we use ritual in our lives to make it meaningful and effective? What do you think? I'm going to put the question out there. What are the rituals that you use? How do we do that? March. So Marge says, isn't the conservative movement really trying to look at how we use rituals in this time, how we bring them into the modern world? Yes, absolutely. I think that is part of what the conservative movement does, but we also run into the problem of, well, this is what it says to do, right? I mean, we're supposed to make a grain offering, or a cow offering, or a sheep offering, and all of these different circumstances that we're going to learn about today. So what do we do? How do we take that and make it relevant today? We don't do it. We don't do it. Certainly not here, and not even in Jerusalem, right? Yeah? So there's the idea of replacement, so to speak, right? Of well, this ritual is now being replaced by something else. So maybe tzedakah, charity, right? Maybe there are other things that we can do that can come to replace sacrifices. Okay? Milt?
We maintain the rituals, and we also try to make them inclusive and appropriate and more modern. I think about Pesach, Passover, which is coming up, which is the holiday that is most widely observed among Jews. And people have emotional ties to it. They remember the seders of their childhood, but it also brings us back to the core element of what's supposed to happen in the Seder ritual.
Absolutely, Milt. You're thinking the way I'm thinking also. You cut a little to the chase, but it's all right, right? In terms of Passover is coming up, right? That's what we do every single time we have a Seder. We try to take these rituals that we've been doing for thousands of years and make them relevant to today. And the most effective Sedarim, the most effective Seders are the ones that do that. Right? If all we do is read the same Haggadah that we've been reading for, hundreds of years and don't bring it into today, it's lost something. Yet, if also all we do is say, okay, today's Passover, we're going to eat, we've also lost something there. That ritual brings something. It connects us back in a powerful way. Anybody else? How do we deal with rituals today? It's not a trick question.
I think sometimes we pick. I think, for instance, if maybe you keep Shabbat, but you don't keep kosher, and you say you think a value choice on which ritual we're going to sort of let go, and which one we're going to hold on real tight to.
So what Brett says for those people who are at home, so I can repeat it, is sometimes we pick, we choose those rituals that have meaning to us, those rituals that we feel, we believe, bring value into our life, and those that don't, we sort of let go. We let by the wayside. There's no doubt that we do that. Everybody does that, by the way. Certainly the Reform movement has made that their platform, right, of learn and choose, right? Learn about all of this and then choose those things that are meaningful to you, right? And that makes it very powerful. It makes it very personal and real. The downside of that is you then create you lack potentially cohesion between the community. And so much of what we as the Jewish people have done has been about doing things as community. If everybody is kind of off doing their own thing, so to speak, to take the argument to its extreme, we no longer have community. So that's the downside of that as we go. But it's great. And I think you're right. I think everybody does. And I would argue Orthodox, people who belong to an Orthodox synagogue pick and choose also. It's not just a Reform or conservative or whatever. Everybody picks and chooses, right? The framework or the scope of what we choose may be different, but we all do. Everybody makes choices in their life. What else? Anything else? How do we take these rituals and make them relevant?
You mentioned the fact that these are commandments for the priests. We don't have priests anymore, and the observance of Judaism is totally different, not just because of the lack of sacrifices.
Mm-hmm.
We no longer have an intercessor between us and God in the ritual. So it's a matter of our taking on these obligations and recognizing that in doing so, we are continuing tradition, no matter what we choose and how we choose to do it. If it's coming to services, if it's somewhat keeping kosher in every way we choose, but we're in a different world that existed at the time that these commandments were given.
Yeah. So we live in a different time now, and it affects the way that we make those choices as we go. Absolutely. Anybody else? So the fact that we're struggling with this shouldn't surprise us. Actually, some of the greatest rabbis struggled with this. And if you look at Maimonides, the way that he understands sacrifices in two very different works are diametrically opposed. In his philosophical work, right, he talks about, let me actually start with the legal work. He talks about the fact that all the laws concerning sacrifices are in the category of chukim, right? Which means we do them, we don't ask why, this is just what we do. And it's a law, and we shouldn't try to think about it, we shouldn't try to change it. But in his philosophical work, he says, the custom which was in those days general among humans, and the general mode of worship in which the Israelites were brought up consisted of sacrificing animals. But today, we don't do that anymore. And he talks about sort of an evolution of sacrifices. Now, it's clear, what do we do today instead of sacrifices? Well, we're here doing it, right? We're here doing it. We pray. That is how we make an offering. And we've talked about this before. The Hebrew word for sacrifice is korban, which comes from the word karov, to come close. So how do we get close to God? How do we come close to God? Through prayer. That's what we do today. But that was an evolution. That changed. That wasn't the way we used to do it. We used to do it by offering a cow or a dove or a grain offering. That's how we used to become close to God. And as I started to try to figure out how Maimonides harmonized these two ideas, because on the one hand, it's this is what we do. On the other hand, it's no, there's an evolution. We need to think about it. That seems to be a contradiction. And so one of the things that Rabbi Sachs noticed about these types of laws is there are some laws that focus on sort of an inner sense of who we should be, and there are some laws that focus on an outer sense of who it is that we should be. There are some laws also that we see that the Torah is trying to minimize, and there are some laws that the Torah and the rabbis try to expand. And what he argues is that those laws that are external, that the Torah is trying to minimize, sacrifices being one of them, is because it's not the ideal, but it's sort of where we are in our evolutionary process. So people used to offer offerings all the time. That's what idolatry, frankly, was all about. And we as Jews are trying to move ourselves away from idolatry into a different way of thinking, into a monotheistic religion that isn't idolatrous, but yet we couldn't just make that jump from one to the next because people wouldn't know how to do it. So God said, okay, this is a concession. This is a concession. We're going to do sacrifices, but you can't do them anytime you want, anywhere you want. Here are the times that you're going to do it. Here are the ways that you're going to do it. And by the way, not everybody is going to do it. Only a certain number of people are going to do it. And by the way, you can't do it anywhere you want. It can only be done in Jerusalem or the place where I cause my name to dwell. It's a minimization after a minimization after a minimization. And we start to see us moving away from sacrifices into what it is that we have now. There are other laws, and the one he brings up actually is, the way that we honor our teachers and our parents, right? That get expanded every single time we see them. And when that happens, he argues, that's the ideal. We may not have gotten to it yet, but we're trying to get to that ideal in our life. And I found this insight so powerful because we human beings struggle with ideal and actuality all the time, right? My ideal weight is whatever, fill in the blank. In actuality, here's where I'm at. Now, how do we bring those two together? How do we find a way to take the ideal in our life and build an actual process to get ourselves there? To get rid of those things that are holding us back, to get rid of those things that keep us anchored in an old way, in a way that maybe is more tunnel vision, and start to see the expansion of what it is that ideal could be. To me, our struggle with korbanot, with sacrifices, as a Jewish people, help us to do that. And our conversation over these next few weeks, as we look at these, is to say, okay, what do these sacrifices mean? What does it mean to offer an offering of gratitude? What does it mean to offer an offering of guilt when we've done something wrong? What's the difference between those two? It's not the same offering. And in our life, how do we find those moments of gratitude? How do we accept those moments of of responsibility and of guilt when we've made a mistake and fix that. Those ideas are all still built into who we are as Jews. The mechanism by which we do it has evolved and changed over the years. So today, we're going to start to read these sacrifices. We're going to start to see these different ideas, and I encourage you to think about them not as an action, but as an idea and an ideal of what does it mean to show that gratitude, to show that responsibility, to show the connection to community, to be able to do all of these sorts of things that we as a Jewish people do. Any questions or comments before we go to our Torah reading? Shabbat Shalom, everyone.